I pretended to be dying just to see if my own family would care. I know it sounds crazy, but I had to know the truth. You see, Grandma, I'm not the same person I was when I used to visit you every Sunday, with scraped knees and chocolate stains on my shirt. Somewhere along the way, I became Phoenix Sterling. Yes, that Phoenix Sterling you've probably seen on the news. The one with the tech empire worth $12 billion. The one who owns half the buildings in the city. But that day in March, lying in that hospital bed with machines beeping around me, I realized I didn't know if anyone loved me for who I was underneath all that money. The plan started when my doctor, Dr. Harrington, called me in for what should have been a routine checkup. I was sitting in his office, marble floors gleaming under the fluorescent lights, when he handed me test results that made my blood run cold. Not because they were bad, they were perfect, but because, as I stared at those numbers, I realized something terrifying. If these results had been different, if they had shown I was dying, who would actually care? I thought about my wife, Serafina. Beautiful, elegant Serafina, with her designer dresses and charity galas. When was the last time she'd looked at me, really looked at me, without dollar signs in her eyes? I thought about my son, Maximilian, 25 years old and already expecting his inheritance, and my daughter, Celestine, who only called when she needed money for her art gallery or her latest boyfriend's business venture. Sitting there in that sterile office, I made a decision that would change everything. I looked Dr. Harrington straight in the eye and said, "Doc, I need you to do something for me. I need you to tell my family I'm dying." He nearly dropped his coffee cup, Grandma. This man who'd been my physician for 15 years, who'd seen me through everything from broken ribs to heart surgery, just stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. "Phoenix, what are you talking about? Your tests are perfect. You're healthier than most men half your age." I leaned forward, my hands shaking slightly. "That's exactly the point, Dr. Harrington. I need to know something, and this might be my only chance to find out." "You know how you always taught me to be honest, Grandma? Well, I explained everything to him. How I'd built my empire from nothing, working 20-hour days, missing school plays and birthday parties. How every relationship in my life seemed to revolve around what I could give rather than who I was. How I'd wake up in my mansion, 40 rooms, Grandma, can you imagine? And feel completely alone." Dr. Harrington listened, his brow furrowed with concern. Finally, he shook his head. "Phoenix, this is unethical. I can't lie to your family about your health." I said, "Then don't lie," and pulled out a checkbook. "I'm going to check myself into your private wing for a week. Tell them I'm undergoing tests for a rare condition. Tell them the prognosis doesn't look good. You won't be lying, you'll just be omitting certain details." It took 3 hours and a donation to his children's hospital fund, but eventually Dr. Harrington agreed to help me. The plan was simple. I'd spend a week in the hospital's VIP wing pretending to be gravely ill. My family would be told I had a rare neurological condition that was progressing rapidly. We'd see who showed up, who cared, and who was just waiting for the will to be read. The hardest part, Grandma, was making that first phone call to Serafina. I was lying in the hospital bed, wearing one of those awful gowns that never quite close in the back, when I dialed her number. My hands were actually shaking. "Phoenix?" Her voice was distracted, probably looking at herself in one of the mirrors scattered throughout our penthouse. "I'm getting ready for the Thornfield charity auction. Can this wait?" "Serafina," I said, trying to make my voice sound weak, I'm in the hospital. Dr. Harrington wants to run some tests. It might be serious. There was a pause. A long pause. Then, "Oh my God, Phoenix! What kind of serious? Should I come?" The way she asked it, like she was hoping the answer would be no, like my potential illness was an inconvenience to her social calendar. "I don't know yet. They're running more tests tomorrow. Maybe you could come by." "Of course, darling, of course. I'll be there as soon as I can." But I could hear her already calculating, already planning. "Should I cancel the auction? It's for underprivileged children." "Don't cancel anything, just when you can." She arrived 3 hours later, and Grandma, the first thing she did was check her reflection in the window. The second thing was ask Dr. Harrington if whatever I had was contagious. She sat in the chair beside my bed for exactly 27 minutes, I counted, before she started checking her phone. "Darling, you look pale," she said, not even looking at me. "Should I call the lawyers? Just to be safe. Make sure all your affairs are in order."
My affairs, not our affairs, not my health or my comfort or whether I was scared. My affairs. I spent that night staring at the ceiling, listening to the machines beep, and wondering if this had been a terrible mistake. But then I remembered what you used to tell me about finding the truth, even when it hurts. The next morning, Maximilian showed up. My son, Grandma, the one I taught to ride a bike in the park behind your old house. He walked into the room wearing a $2,000 suit and the kind of cold expression I'd only seen him use on business competitors. "Dad," he said, not even sitting down. "Mom called. She said you're sick." "Possibly very sick," I said, watching his face carefully. "Dr. Harrington is still running tests, but..." "But what?" His voice was sharp, impatient. "What exactly are we dealing with here? Is it terminal? Progressive? What's the timeline?" Timeline? Like I was a project with a deadline. I told him what Dr. Harrington and I had agreed on. A rare neurological condition, prognosis unclear, but not looking good. I watched my son's face as I spoke, looking for even a flicker of emotion, of concern, of love. Instead, I saw calculation. "Have you updated your will recently? Because if this is as serious as it sounds, we need to make sure everything's properly structured. Tax implications, you understand?" Tax implications? My son was asking about tax implications while his father was supposedly dying. "Maximilian," I said quietly, "aren't you going to ask how I'm feeling? If I'm scared? If there's anything you want to say to me?" He looked genuinely confused by the question. "Well, obviously you're not feeling well, or you wouldn't be here. And as for being scared," he shrugged, "you've always been tough. You'll fight whatever this is." But he said it like he was reading from a script, Grandma. Like he was saying what he thought he should say, not what he felt. Celestine was worse. My daughter arrived that afternoon with her latest boyfriend, a struggling musician named Zephyr, who wore more jewelry than she did. She breezed into the room like she was making an entrance at a premiere, all flowing scarves and dramatic gestures. "Daddy!" she cried, rushing to my bedside. For a moment, my heart lifted. Finally, someone who cared. But then she kept talking. "This is just terrible timing. I'm supposed to close on the new gallery space next week, the one I told you about, in Soho. And now with you being sick, I don't know if the investors will feel confident moving forward. You know how these art people are. They're so superstitious about backing projects when there's family drama." Family drama. My illness was family drama. "Celestine, I might be dying." She waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, Daddy, Don't be so dramatic. You're Phoenix Sterling. You don't die. You negotiate with death and come out ahead." She laughed at her own joke. Actually laughed. Zephyr, meanwhile, was eyeing the expensive medical equipment like he was pricing it for resale. "This is some serious hardware. What's something like that cost? 6 figures?" That's when I realized that even my daughter's boyfriend was more interested in my money than my health. For 3 days, Grandma, I lay in that bed watching my family come and go. Serafina visited twice more, each time asking Dr. Harrington about arrangements and whether I'd made any recent changes to my insurance policies. Maximilian showed up with legal documents that needed signing, just in case, he said, and spent most of his visits on his phone handling business calls. Celestine brought different boyfriends each time, introducing me to them like I was a networking opportunity. "This is my father. He owns Sterling Industries. Maybe you've heard of it?" None of them asked about my pain levels. None of them brought me anything from home. A book I might want to read. Pictures of grandchildren I might want to see one last time. Memories of better times. They brought lawyers, accountants, and business associates. By the 4th day, I was starting to think the test had confirmed my worst fears. My family didn't love me. They loved what I could give them. They weren't grieving my potential loss. They were managing the transition of assets. But then something happened that changed everything. I was lying there feeling sorry for myself when Dr. Harrington poked his head into the room. "Phoenix, there's someone here to see you. She says she's family, but she's not on the approved visitor list." "Who is it?" I asked, not really caring. Probably another distant relative who'd heard about my condition through the family grapevine.
"She says her name is Luna. Luna Martinez. Claims to be your—" he checked his notes. "Your housekeeper's daughter?" Luna. Sweet Luna, who used to help her mother, Esperanza, clean our house when she was a teenager. I hadn't seen her in years. She'd gone to college, then nursing school, then moved across the country for a job. But Luna had always been special, Grandma. Even as a kid, she had this way of seeing through all the money and status to the person underneath. "Send her in," I said. When Luna walked through that door, I barely recognized her. The shy teenager I remembered had grown into a confident young woman in scrubs, her dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, her eyes bright with intelligence, and something else, genuine concern. "Mr. Sterling," she said, and her voice was exactly the same, warm and honest. "I heard you were sick. I was working a shift downstairs in the ER when I saw your name on the patient list." She worked here. She was a nurse at this hospital, and she'd seen my name and come to check on me. "Luna," I said, and my voice cracked a little, "you didn't have to come." "Of course I did." She pulled up the chair that had been empty most of the week, the chair where someone who loved me should have been sitting. "You were always kind to my family. When Mom got sick, you paid for her treatment without being asked. When I needed money for college, you created that scholarship fund." I had forgotten about those things, Grandma. In all my years of big business deals and corporate acquisitions, I'd forgotten about the small kindnesses, the quiet generosity that didn't make headlines. Luna sat with me for 2 hours that first day. She didn't ask about my will or my business or what would happen to my companies. She asked about my comfort, whether I was sleeping well, if the food was decent. She brought me a book of crossword puzzles because she remembered I used to do them while her mother cleaned. "Are you scared?" she asked at one point, and it was the first time anyone had asked me that question. I almost broke character right then, Grandma. Almost told her the truth. But something made me stick to the script. Yes, I said, honestly. Because even though I wasn't really dying, I was scared. Scared of what this test was revealing about my life, about the people I thought loved me. Luna nodded. That's normal. But you're not alone, okay? I'll come by every day I'm working. And she did. Every day for the rest of that week, Luna stopped by during her breaks. Sometimes she could only stay for 10 minutes between patients, but she always came. She brought me real food from the cafeteria because she said the VIP meals looked too fancy to actually be nutritious. She brought me updates about her mother, stories from her work in the ER, pictures of the little apartment she'd saved up to buy. She talked to me like I was a person, not a bank account with legs. On the 6th day, I realized something that shook me to my core. In all the visits from my wife and children, none of them had touched me. Not a hand on the shoulder, not a kiss on the forehead, not even a brief squeeze of my fingers. But Luna, this young woman who owed me nothing, held my hand while she told me about a difficult patient she helped that morning. The thing is, she said, her thumb gently stroking the back of my hand, people need to feel connected, especially when they're scared. Touch is healing, you know? It reminds us we're not alone. That night, I made a decision. This test had shown me everything I needed to know, and it was time to end it. But first, I had one more thing to do. The next morning, I called everyone to the hospital for what I said would be an important announcement about my condition. Serafina arrived first, looking perfectly composed in a black dress that I realized she'd probably chosen because it would work for a funeral. Maximilian came with his lawyer and a briefcase full of documents. Celestine brought 3 different boyfriends because she couldn't decide which one might be most useful for networking at a wake. Luna came too, because I'd asked her to. She stood quietly in the corner, still in her scrubs from the night shift. Dr. Harrington arrived looking nervous. We'd agreed this morning that it was time to end the charade, but he was still worried about the ethical implications of what we'd done.
I sat up in bed, looking at all these people who were supposedly the most important in my life, and began to speak. I asked you all here, I said, because I have something important to tell you about my condition. Serafina leaned forward slightly. Maximilian's lawyer had his pen ready. Celestine was whispering something to one of her boyfriends. The truth is, I continued, I'm not dying. I'm not even sick. Dr. Harrington will confirm that my test results are perfect. I've been here this week by choice, conducting what you might call an experiment. The silence that followed was deafening, Grandma.
Serafina's face went through several emotions. Confusion, anger, embarrassment, before settling on cold fury. What do you mean, an experiment? I mean, I wanted to see how you would all react if I was actually dying. I wanted to know if you loved me or just my money. Maximilian stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. You lied to us. You made us worry. Did you worry? Because from where I was lying, it looked like you were more concerned about tax implications than whether I was comfortable or scared. That's not fair, Celestine protested. Of course we were worried, but we also had to be practical. Someone had to think about the business, the estate. Someone did think about those things, I said quietly. All of you. But none of you taught about me. I looked around the room at their faces, and I saw the truth of what I'd discovered. They were angry at being caught, not sorry for how they'd behaved. Luna, I said, turning to the young woman in the corner, you're the only person who's been here every day, the only one who asked if I was scared, who held my hand, who treated me like a human being instead of a walking trust fund. Luna looked embarrassed. Mr. Sterling, You just cared, I said, without expecting anything in return. Serafina found her voice first. This is manipulative and cruel, Phoenix. How dare you put us through this? Put you through what? A week of pretending to care about someone other than yourselves? That's when the real argument started, Grandma. Maximilian accused me of being a sociopath. Celestine said I was having some kind of breakdown. Serafina threatened to call her lawyers about emotional distress. But through it all, Luna just watched quietly, and when the yelling got too loud, she stepped forward. Stop, she said firmly, and something in her voice made everyone quiet down. Stop. She looked around the room, then back at me. Mr. Sterling, I understand why you did this, and I'm not going to pretend it wasn't hurtful to your family. Even if they didn't show their hurt the way you wanted them to? Then she turned to my wife and children. But I've been working in hospitals for 5 years now, and I've seen a lot of families facing real loss, real grief, and I can tell you that people don't always handle it the way you'd expect. Some people get practical because it's the only way they can cope. Some people distance themselves because they can't bear the pain. She paused, choosing her words carefully. That doesn't excuse not showing love and support, but it might explain it. The room was quiet now. Everyone listening to this young nurse who had more wisdom than the rest of us combined. The real question, Luna continued, is what happens now? Because you can't undo this test, and you can't pretend you didn't learn something from it. So what are you going to do with that knowledge? That night, after everyone had left, some angrier than others, I lay in that hospital bed thinking about Luna's question. What was I going to do with what I'd learned? The answer came to me slowly, like pieces of a puzzle fitting together. I was going to change everything. I discharged myself the next morning and went home to that 40-room mansion that had never felt emptier. But instead of wallowing, I started making calls. First to my lawyers, then to my accountants, then to the heads of my various companies. Over the next month, I restructured my entire life, Grandma. I sold the mansion and moved into a normal house in the suburbs. 5 bedrooms, white picket fence, neighbors who didn't know or care about my net worth. I stepped back from day-to-day operations of my companies, promoting people who'd worked hard for years without recognition. But the biggest change was in how I dealt with my family. I asked Serafina to meet me for coffee, not at some fancy restaurant where we'd be seen, but at a little diner near the hospital where Luna worked. She arrived looking suspicious and defensive. If this is about the hospital thing, she started, but I held up my hand. It's not about blame. It's about truth. The truth is, we've been married for 26 years, and somewhere along the way, we stopped being a couple and started being business partners. She stared into her coffee cup. Phoenix, I don't know what you want me to say. I want you to say what you actually feel, not what you think I want to hear, not what's socially appropriate, but what you actually feel. It took a long time, but finally she looked up at me with tears in her eyes. I was scared, she said quietly. When you said you might be sick, I was terrified, but I didn't know how to show it. We've been strangers for so long, I didn't know how to be your wife anymore.
That conversation lasted 4 hours, Grandma. We talked about things we hadn't discussed in years, how the money had changed us, how success had isolated us, how we'd forgotten how to just be together without an agenda. We're in counseling now. It's not easy, and I don't know if we'll make it, but at least we're trying to find our way back to each other instead of just coexisting. The conversation with Maximilian was harder. My son was still angry about the deception, still convinced I'd been unfair. "You set us up to fail," he said when I asked him to lunch. "You created an impossible test." "Did I?" I asked. "Was it impossible to ask about my comfort, to bring me something from home, to hold my hand?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I didn't know you wanted that." "I've always wanted that. I just never asked for it." "We're working on it, Grandma. I'm learning to ask for what I need emotionally, and he's learning that being my son means more than being my heir. It's awkward sometimes, like we're both learning a new language, but we're trying." Celestine was the most resistant to change. She felt like I'd betrayed her trust, and for a while, she wouldn't speak to me at all. But slowly, very slowly, we're building something new. I'm learning about her art, really learning, not just writing checks for it. And she's learning to see me as a father who loves her, not just a source of funding for her projects. But the biggest change, Grandma, came from Luna. A month after the hospital incident, I went back to visit her during her lunch break. I found her in the cafeteria, eating a sandwich and reading a medical journal. "Mr. Sterling," she said, looking surprised, "how are you feeling?" "Really feeling this time." I sat down across from her. "Better," I said, "thanks to you." "She didn't do anything special," I said. "You treated me like a person. You showed me what it looked like when someone actually cared." She was quiet for a moment, then asked, "What are you going to do now?" "I was hoping," I said, "that you might help me figure that out." That's how Luna became not just a friend, but a kind of guide for me, Grandma. She helped me understand the difference between charity and compassion, between giving money and giving yourself. She showed me how to volunteer at the hospital, not as Phoenix Sterling the billionaire making a tax-deductible donation, but as just another person who wanted to help. She introduced me to patients who had no family, no visitors, no one to hold their hand when they were scared. I started spending time with them, learning their stories, sharing their fears and hopes. I learned more about real life in those hospital rooms than I had in 40 years of boardrooms. Luna also helped me start a different kind of foundation, not the big, flashy charity events that Serafina used to organize, but quiet, personal help for people who needed it. We helped single mothers pay for childcare while they went to nursing school. We bought groceries for families dealing with medical bankruptcy. We did it without press releases or tax benefits, just because it was the right thing to do. And somewhere in all of this, something unexpected happened. I fell in love again. Not with Luna, Grandma. She's like a daughter to me, and she's happily married to another nurse named Marcus, who's as good-hearted as she is. I fell in love with life again, with purpose, with the person I used to be before money complicated everything. I fell in love with helping Mrs. Rodriguez learn to walk again after her stroke, and with reading to Mr. Johnson, who was losing his sight to diabetes. I fell in love with the way children in the pediatric ward would light up when I brought them books, and with the way elderly patients would share stories about their youth that made me laugh until my sides hurt. I fell in love with being useful for who I was, not what I owned. 6 months after my fake illness, I was back at the hospital for a real checkup, when Dr. Harrington pulled me aside. "Phoenix," he said, "I have to ask, do you regret what we did?" I thought about it carefully. I said, "I regret the deception. I regret hurting people, even if they needed to hear some difficult truths. But I don't regret learning what I learned." "And what was that?" I said. "That love isn't something you can buy or inherit or demand. It's something you have to earn every day, by how you treat people, by showing up, by caring about their fears and dreams as much as your own." He nodded slowly. "And your family, how are things with them?" I said, "We're all learning. Learning to be honest with each other, learning to ask for what we need, learning that being family means more than sharing DNA or a bank account." It's been a year now since my week in the hospital. My relationship with Serafina is still fragile, but it's real in a way it hasn't been for years. We're talking about maybe renewing our vows, not with a big expensive ceremony, but just the two of us and a minister, promising to actually be married this time, not just partners in the business of being rich.
Maximilian is engaged to a teacher named Sarah, who doesn't know about his trust fund and loves him for his terrible jokes and the way he remembers everyone's birthday. He's working at one of my companies, but in an entry-level position, learning the business from the ground up instead of expecting to start at the top. Celestine opened her gallery, but she's showing local artists now, not just famous names that look good in newspaper reviews. She's dating a social worker named David, who volunteers at the same children's shelter where she started teaching art classes. And me? I'm living in that little suburban house, driving myself to work in a 5-year-old sedan, and I've never been happier. I still have money, more than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. But now I know the difference between having wealth and being wealthy. Being wealthy, I've learned, is about having people who love you enough to sit by your bedside without calculating inheritance tax. It's about having purpose beyond profit margins. It's about knowing that when your time really comes, when you're actually dying, you'll be surrounded by people who will miss you for who you were, not what you owned. Luna was right that day in the hospital when she talked about the healing power of human connection. I spent so many years building walls with my money, protecting myself from people who might only want me for what I could give them, that I forgot how to let people in who might love me for who I was. The funny thing is, Grandma, pretending to be sick taught me what it meant to be truly healthy, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, completely. I think about you a lot these days, about how you raised me to believe that family was about more than blood, that love was about showing up even when it was hard, that true wealth was measured in relationships, not bank balances. Somehow, in building my empire, I'd forgotten those lessons, but I remember them now. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd actually been dying that week. Would my family have eventually found their way to love? Would they have overcome their awkwardness and fear to be present with me? I'd like to think so. People rise to occasions sometimes when they're forced to, but I'm glad I didn't have to find out that way. Last week, I was back at the hospital visiting a new patient, a man about my age who'd just been diagnosed with the very disease I'd pretended to have. His family was gathered around his bed, and I watched his wife hold his hand while his children took turns reading to him from his favorite book. That could have been me, I realized. That could have been my ending if I'd been brave enough to ask for love instead of testing for it. If I'd been vulnerable enough to show my fears instead of hiding behind my wealth. But it's not too late for a new beginning. I'm writing this letter to you, Grandma, because I wanted you to know that your lessons didn't die with you. They just got buried under years of success and suspicion and fear. But they're growing again now, like flowers pushing through concrete. I want you to know that the grandson you raised, the one who cried when he found an injured bird, who shared his lunch with hungry classmates, who always said thank you and please and meant it, he's still here. He just got lost for a while in a world that rewarded him for being something else. I want you to know that I finally understand what you meant when you said that the best inheritance you could leave me wasn't money, but the knowledge of how to love and be loved. I want you to know that I'm teaching those lessons to my own family now, and that maybe, with time and patience and a lot of honest conversations, we'll build something real together. And I want you to know that every day when I sit beside a hospital bed, holding the hand of someone who's scared and alone, I think of you. I think of how you held my hand during thunderstorms, how you taught me that being present was the greatest gift you could give someone. I think of how you never needed to test my love, because you never doubted it. And you never doubted it because you earned it every day with your kindness, your wisdom, and your unwavering faith in who I could become. Thank you, Grandma, for loving me well enough that I finally learned to love others well too. I know you can't write back, but I hope somehow you know that your lessons live on, not just in me, but in Luna, who shows up for strangers every day, in Marcus, who loves her enough to volunteer alongside her, even though he's afraid of hospitals, in the patients we visit, who pass on kindness to their roommates, in my family, who are slowly learning to choose love over fear. The ripples of love you created keep spreading, Grandma. Keep touching lives you'll never know about. Keep changing hearts you never held. I used to think my legacy would be the companies I built, the buildings with my name on them, the fortune that would outlast my lifetime. Now I know better. My real legacy will be the love I learned to give, the connections I helped heal, the moments I chose to show up instead of write a check. It will be Maximilian learning to put relationship before profit, and Celestine discovering that true art comes from the heart, not the market. It will be Serafina and me, maybe, learning to grow old together instead of just growing old in the same house.
It will be every hand I held, every story I listened to, every time I chose to be human instead of trying to be superhuman. And it will be this letter, this story, this reminder that it's never too late to remember who you really are underneath all the roles you play and masks you wear. Maybe someone reading this is sitting in their own version of that hospital room, wondering if they're loved for who they are or what they provide. Maybe someone is surrounded by people who seem to care more about their will than their well-being. If that's you, you don't have to pretend to be dying to find out the truth. You can start by being more alive, more present,
more honest, more willing to show your fears and needs and hopes. You can start by asking for what you really want from the people you love: their time, their attention, their genuine care. You can start by giving what you want to receive, showing up, listening deeply, loving without conditions or expectations. You can start by remembering that wealth isn't about what you accumulate, but what you contribute to the lives around you. The test I put my family through was unfair in many ways, but the lesson it taught was valuable. Love isn't something that should have to be proven under extreme circumstances. It should be demonstrated, celebrated, and nurtured every ordinary day. So, that's what I'm trying to do now, Grandma. Live every ordinary day like it matters. Love every ordinary person like they're extraordinary. And remember that the greatest fortune anyone can leave behind isn't money. It's the memory of how they made others feel. Thank you for teaching me that, even when I was too stubborn to listen. Thank you for loving me enough that I eventually learned to love myself and others the same way. And thank you for still being with me in every act of kindness I choose, in every moment I pick connection over protection, in every day I wake up grateful to be truly, completely alive. I love you, Grandma, not because you gave me things, but because you gave me the gift of knowing what love actually looks like. I hope I'm finally doing you proud. Your grandson, Phoenix. P.S. I kept one thing from the old life. That photo of us from my 8th birthday. The one where I'm missing my front teeth and you're laughing at something I said. It sits on my kitchen table now, in my little house with the white picket fence, and every morning when I see it, I remember that the best moments in life are the ones money can't buy. They're the ones where love shows up, simple and true and unafraid. That's the legacy I want to leave now. Not buildings or businesses or bank accounts, but moments like that. Moments where someone feels truly seen, truly valued, truly loved. Moments that matter. If you've made it this far in my letter to Grandma, thank you for listening to this story. Maybe it reminds you of someone in your own life, someone who loved you well, or someone you wish loved you better, or someone you want to love more fully yourself. If it does, I'd love to hear about it. After all, the best stories are the ones that help us remember we're not alone in this strange, beautiful business of being human.